today. But wanted to thank everyone for attending our session today and do some brief introductions and then get started. If you all have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat while we're presenting, or we'll try to have some time at the end to answer some questions. I want this to try to be as informative as possible during the time we have today and try to answer as many questions. So start off, my name is Matt Kerch. I serve as the Executive Director of Housing and Residential Communities at the University of Alabama. I've been here, this is my 9th year, and whenever I came to Alabama, I was Director of Housing Operations and then transitioned into the Executive Director role. But a lot of the time that I spend my days on is working on sort of long-term planning, master planning, to make sure that we're set up for the future. And last year, whenever all of our COVID situation happened, really threw a curveball to us. And we had to sort of rethink the way that we're doing some things in terms of deferred maintenance and planning for the future. So hopefully today we can talk about some of those things that we've done here and Neil's done at his institutions. But I'll let Neil introduce himself too.
Morning, everyone. My name is Neil McMillion, and I am the Director of Housing and Residence Life at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. I have actually only been at UAH now for about 2 months. Prior to that, I was at the University of West Florida, and Matt and I worked together when I was the Director of Operations at the University of Alabama. So a lot of this will come from the University of Alabama, but I also want to touch on, I want to make sure everybody realizes that what we're going to go over today isn't just for a big state university. It is scalable. So anything that we talk about today can be done at a small institution, big institution, regional, anything. So please, as we go through this, just think about your institution and how this isn't just for big schools. This is for absolutely anybody, and we can help you scale this any way you need to make it beneficial for your college or university.
So some quick objectives for today. First, we're going to talk about, how do you go about creating some of these documents in terms of campus master planning, planning for your residence hall system, working with campus partners. We have a couple documents that we've developed here that we use on a regular basis that we are more than happy to share with anyone that's on the call. Some of them are constantly being updated. Neil and I probably had hundreds of versions of some of these documents on our computers at any different time, just to plan out different scenarios in terms of enrollment management or buildings that need to come online or offline. And we'll talk about those strategies that we've used in terms of renovation, construction work, thinking about how a decision you make now impacts, your operations years down the line, and talking about what challenges we've faced, especially over the last year, when we've had to really take in consideration a lot of the COVID-19 protocols, any types of budget cuts, budget freezes, refunds that you might have had to give, and how that impacts your overall operation. So in terms of learning outcomes for today, I think that we wanted you to take away a couple key things. First thing is to identify the needs that you have in your system, and hopefully we can talk about some different strategies that we have used in our operations that you might be able to take and help your operation as well. Also identify those key stakeholders that you need to involve in a lot of these different conversations and opportunities. I know at my institution here, and I think I can speak for Neil too, our work is a lot of relationship building and developing good working relationships, trust with campus partners to make sure that you're all on the same page and working towards those common goals. Also, like I said, we have a couple documents that we'll touch briefly. We have done this at sort of a half-day workshop where we would dig into these documents a little bit more, and we're more than happy to sit down with any of you that might need some extra time and help with some of these documents, but to really talk about the importance of developing these and how you can incorporate it into your daily work. Neil, I don't know if you want to take this one.
Sure. So the very first thing you have to do is look at your long range plan, right? I mean, you have to have long-term goals before you can even really set some short-term ones. So one of the hardest things when you're doing master planning is to gather all the information, right? So it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, and you have to be patient because there's a lot of people on your campus that you're probably going to have to speak with in order to gather this information. So, you know, a lot of the people you need to start with are your facilities folks. So if you don't have that relationship with your folks in facilities, then that's where you need to begin. Those people are in your buildings all the time as well as you, and hopefully. And if there's anybody who is going to know how much it's going to cost for deferred maintenance on certain mechanical components and things like that, it's going to be them. So make sure that you have that relationship with them. I would suggest, you know, a lot of housing folks, some have a lot of facilities experience and some don't have a lot. But I would lean on your facilities department at your university to help you walk through that. It's important that that you do inspections with those folks. We spent a lot of time when I was at the University of Alabama with the facilities folks. We set up weekly walks of our buildings with our facilities liaison to make sure that we always knew what our facilities looked like, and he could write down the things that we noticed and make sure that we're staying on top of those. So I would suggest if you're not walking with your facilities department on a regular basis, that you do that. And for you personally, I would suggest to always educate yourself. So you as the housing person are responsible for those residential buildings. So make sure that you educate yourself. Learn about what the terminology is. Make sure that you're leading the way for your housing program. It is important to have those relationships with facilities, but you know, not everything they want to do may coincide with the way you see your long-term planning in your housing department. So be willing to jump in there and learn terminology and educate yourself on what facilities and master planning is all about, so that you can make sure that you're doing what's best for your housing department. And maybe not what's just best for facilities, because those may be two different things sometimes. Sometimes they're lockstep, sometimes they're not. So make sure you educate yourself and stay on that. Think about what is your housing program going to look like 20, 25 years out? And that's where you need to really start. Make sure that look at what the university has going on. Check out the master plan for the university. You know, those are usually done 10, 12 years out. So make sure you check those as well. Don't live in a bubble and think, you know, we're housing, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. Because a lot of times, you know, a university or a college has so much debt that they have available to them, so much bond debt or room for growth. And you got to make sure you fit into that plan. So make sure you also check with the master plan of the university, and not just what your plan is moving forward for housing. And how has COVID changed that? Well, as we all know, you know, loss of revenue. If you had planned to get all this money and put it into a bucket and put it into your reserves for long-term planning, this year may have set you back a little bit. So, and I don't think this is going to be a 1-year deal. This is going to be a 2- and 3-year deal probably, that it's going to set you back. So then you have to completely rethink the way you go about filling in these documents we're about to show you, so that moving forward, you really have a good idea of a rethink here, because it's just really not going to work out probably the way you had planned on it prior to COVID showing up.
Yeah, and you know, I think a couple other points to go off of that related to COVID and how this has changed, you know, the work that we're doing on a day-to-day basis. Of course, it's that budget impact. I know I've talked to multiple peers, you know, around the country. Some are giving back hundreds of thousands of dollars in refunds. Some are giving millions and millions of dollars in refunds. So it is going to have an impact on our bottom line and our budgets. And, you know, speaking in from My experience here, we usually do several $1 million worth of work over the summer in terms of deferred maintenance. And I know, that's all scalable depending on size of institution and where you are, but not being able to do deferred maintenance in our buildings, it's detrimental to some of our facilities. And like Neil said, it's one thing that we need to prioritize about what are those immediate needs that cannot be deferred a year or 2 years or 3 years if we're still in this time of a budget crisis, or at one point here, we're only doing what's deemed as an essential purchase. So I think we've done a really good job this year of cutting our expenses as much as we can while still supporting our students with educational programming in the buildings and doing those things that we absolutely need to do in our facilities. And some of these documents that we're going to show today justify those expenditures and justify what is an essential purchase for our facilities. I think this also has made us evaluate our staffing needs in a way. I know for me, we had a couple positions that we were not allowed to rehire right away, and we had to make do with, sort of piecing those positions out to other people in our area, and we got through for a year. Now, if we're going to have to get through for another year or two, we will make it work. But I think it's really helps us understand our staffing structure, working from home, working in the office. What does that look like for your area? What do you need to be most successful there? Of course, Neil mentioned about refunds. If you've had to give any refunds, you might have had to dip into any reserve funds you had, or you might have been running a deficit where you need to borrow money from a division or institution. So those are things to always consider too in terms of fiscal resources. Some institutions had to close halls. I know we had to take some spaces offline for isolation and quarantine housing. If we're not getting rent dollars for those spaces, it is going to affect our budget in a negative way because we're not getting money for those spaces. And also some institutions had to de-densify campus. I know some institutions had to put one person in a traditional room that's made for 2 people. So again, how does that affect your bottom line? And we'll talk about that here in a minute.
And I think 2 other things that kind of go along with that are there other revenue sources other than your heads and beds, right? So, some of you may have gotten CARES money, and that's up to the university how they're going to distribute that money. But are there also areas where you feel like you can work with a campus partner? Matt mentioned programming in the residence halls. Can you work with your student life group or other areas on campus to save some of that money by working together with your campus partners? So I would encourage you to look around campus and see, are there folks that you can team up with and look for other sources of revenue other than just your occupancy revenue as an auxiliary?
Yeah.
So I think that's important.
So the next sheet that we're going to go into, this one of our forms that we've talked about and how we've modified it for COVID a little bit, is this housing phasing strategy guide. So what this looks like is it's a guide for all of our buildings on campus. And when we're looking down here, we have multiple bits of information that's available. And I use this on sometimes a daily basis, sometimes on a weekly basis, to share with my supervisor or our vice president or even the president to discuss how decisions that we're making now impacts the future of our operations. So as we're going through here, we have a column for all of our buildings. We have what is the capacity each year for those facilities. Some will be higher in some years, some will be lower, depending on renovation work, depending on if the building is offline, if it comes down. Anything in yellow on here is a proposed addition of beds. So this could be, mostly new construction for us. It could be renovation work whenever you're renovating and creating new beds. Anything in blue is a renovation year where it might be offline for a year. There might be a significant renovation that you might have some spaces offline. Red closed. Most of these would be buildings that we'd be taking offline or demolishing. A change in occupancy, if you do any renovations or if you have space that can be shifted from being a double to a single, we note that in here as well. The bottom section, and I, like I said, Neil and I can send this out to people that want to look at this closer, and I have blank documents like this where you can fill in your numbers for your institution as well. The bottom line is a lot of our enrollment trends. So, I have current numbers leading up to the year that we're in, and then trying to work with projections, because we need to anticipate if we're going to increase our student population by 1% each year. Where does that mean we're going to be in terms of beds? For our campus, we have a first year residency requirement. So I know we are going to capture about 94 to 95% of our freshman class. And then that leaves a set number of spaces for our upper class students. So with those enrollment trends, we can work to sort of shift of how many spaces are we going to have for upper class students? What do we need to do in terms of switching some of those spaces from singles to doubles to try to be as dynamic as possible? And, we also look at total overall occupancy, and then if we're running a surplus or deficit in those years, because this is where we can really make a play for our administration to say, hey, in 5 years, we're going to be running a 400-person deficit. If we continue these trends in enrollment, we need to start thinking about what are we going to do in the future. So it really does sort of keep those conversations going so that administration can see what that end goal is. Neil, I don't know if you have anything to
Well, and in terms of COVID, talking about enrollment trends, I know a lot of you may have not made decisions about what does the fall look like, right? So we're not sure. Parents aren't sure. Students aren't sure. So at that point, you may be finding right now as you're going through your contracting, your leasing period, that your numbers may be down. So that may be something to really look at on this sheet and think about. How is COVID going to affect occupancy, not only this year, but moving forward? Because I think until we get some decisions based upon where we are pandemic-wise moving forward in the next few months, I think people are going to be a little nervous. So I think you need to kind of look at your occupancy and plan for maybe even 2 scenarios. Hey, we're going back full steam. Everybody's going to be back. Our occupancy is looking good. Or maybe we're going to be a little bit more cautious and have de-densify again, or have just less people due to just people not being very comfortable. So I think that's a big thing to look at moving forward as well.
And that's sort of what we did with this bottom section here, and it's not real clear, but it says assumptions. We put a lot of different sort of scenarios in there this year for COVID about if we do have to de-densify, this is how it would impact our residents. We also had, I always have a list of sort of required upper class students that are needed to stay on campus. That's some of our athletes, our honors, our staff with our RAs, some of our living learning communities that bring upper class students back. So going into that upper class number, I only have a really small amount of space that a bunch of people are really fighting for. So we need to make some of these decisions sooner than later each year. But yeah, like Neil said, this is really setting up, different scenarios for your upcoming years, planning ahead. If you can get any of those players involved in terms of enrollment management, that might have a glimpse of what an institution is going to look like. I know that's something that we've struggled with here for years, is to really get what are our estimates? What are we really thinking their numbers are going to look like? Because if we're going to increase 4 or 5%, we need to make some decisions early on about that next year. So if you can get any of that insight, the better to help you with developing some of these documents. And Neil, you want to talk about this one?
Yeah, sure. Well, I see we're running a little short on time. I won't spend a ton of time here, but this is what we reference as the life cycle reference sheet, and this is looking at everything that goes into a residential building for the next 25 years in this example. You don't have to do it for 25 years. You can do it for 10, 15, 20, whatever you choose. But this is a very comprehensive document. And it should cover everything. I mean, you look at roofs, you look at the envelope of the building, you look at the furniture, the fixtures, the equipment. You just look at absolutely everything there is to the building. Now, again, the hard part of this is it's all the front end work. So if you get through the front end work, you're golden. Okay. So take your time, work with your campus partners, get these numbers right, because if these numbers are right on the front end for years to come, it will help you tremendously. So, you know, if you're looking at furniture and you want to know how long it's going to take before you got to replace sofas, and then 10 years later you feel like you need to do it again, and how much is that going to cost, and how much do you think that that's going to cost 10 years from now, so that you can plan all those things, because anybody who runs facilities and housing knows that there's a lot that goes into that. You know, your mechanical systems, your electrical systems, your FF&E. So this document here, if you'll really work hard on the front end and get those numbers in there, this can really set you up to know exactly where you are. Carpet, everything. So it's just, like I said, it's just comprehensive, and it can be an extremely valuable tool if you choose to use it.
Yeah, and I think, you know, what Neil said, I mean, it is a lot of work up front. I think it probably took us a good year and a half to get some of these numbers and everything into this document. I mean, there were things that components in our buildings that we weren't sure how old they were. Facilities weren't sure how old they were. We had to bring in some people to give us estimates. But it really was a partnership with our facilities team, local contractors, to try to get estimates of, all right, what's an average life cycle for this component? How much time do we have left? What do we need a budget for? When do we need a budget for it? So that this is another landing page that we have in this sheet that everything sort of funnels to. So if you make a change in it, we know overall how much we probably should be investing in our buildings. Now, some of these years we can't put $7 million into a building, but we can really make those decisions on what we can defer and what are those immediate needs, right, Neil?
Yeah, and I think that Matt brings up a good point. If you can set aside a little bit of money, I would suggest that maybe you look for a group that with your facilities department that can come in and give you a true assessment of your buildings. You know, your facilities department and you see these buildings every day, day in, day out. Sometimes it doesn't hurt to have somebody come in from the outside and really just give all of your inventory a once over and get their opinion. Doesn't mean you have to use or do everything that they say you need to do, but I do think it's important maybe to get a fresh set of eyes in there and look at your facilities, and maybe then put together what you have as deferred maintenance or items that you need to work on, and then the outside group, and then come to some compromise or agreement on what can we do moving forward based upon our debt capacity and reserves that we have in place.
Yeah, and I think for this one, you know, then you can make that argument about projects that you might have had to defer. So, I mean, we had a lot of projects that we just didn't do last summer because we needed to cut costs. And so this summer I was able to go and say, you know, yes, these are the ones that can be deferred another year, but these are the ones that are really going to impact our students if we don't do anything. We have some older apartment style buildings on campus that each have an individual AC unit for each one. About half of them really need to be replaced. And I said, we really don't want those failing in August when students get here and then they're living in a 100-degree apartment. So can we at least try to do those? And then other ones that might fail, we can get on a as needed basis. But you can make those arguments for how to do these or when to do these things if you have some of the supporting documents. Other things to consider, especially now during COVID, you know, have that priority list of projects ready, especially if any restrictions are lifted. If you are under a spending freeze, I know I have that sort of always available. If someone says, well, what are those things you really need? Well, here they are. These are the things that we really need to consider if we can, and how much can we spend? this is a good time to do facility assessments as well. I know some of us would usually be busy doing some of these projects. Well, if we can get out, like Neil said, get out, walk the buildings, make sure that you're finding things that might need to be addressed immediately. So get out there and see what's going on in the buildings. Meeting with campus partners, making sure that you're all sort of on the same page and ready. Developing those capital plan projects, so whenever we can start spending, we have that good deferred maintenance plan ready to go. And I think some of these documents really lend themselves to that, and making those priority lists like we said before. Neil, you want to take this one?
Yeah, I think we all have a good idea of what happens if we wait too long. So the cost of the money to the department obviously goes up. We always have inflation on items that we need to purchase, or contractors are charging more later, or economy of scale changes. Always things that we need to look at. So if you wait too long, you may end up paying more. And I'm sure a lot of us are in that boat, because we've deferred for so long with some older buildings that really it's going to cost us more than maybe if we had planned earlier. If the buildings are in bad shape, you know, what's your occupancy level going to be like? Can you maintain a high occupancy level if people don't want to live in your buildings? So there are things that we can't forget, you know. Just, we always want to be concerned about the mechanical, the electrical, the major parts of the building that are important, but you can't forget about the FF&E as well. You know, there's a lot of things, furniture that students are going to need. They don't want to sit on a couch that's 20 years old. So there are some things like that you're going to have to compete with off-campus markets, and if you don't stay on top of those things, it will bite you. So you may have to take a building offline for an extended period. Obviously, that's going to hurt you revenue-wise. You can't bring in revenue if the building's not open. So if you keep up with things and you can keep the buildings open, you'll be able to bring in that revenue. And in extreme cases, if you have to tear a building down, then which is better? Do you spend time working on a building? Maybe the envelope's good. Maybe the shell of the building is fine. Internally, you're having some plumbing problems, some electrical issues, things you need to do. You need to figure out, is it worth tearing down the building and building something new? Is that the better option? Or is it worth it, you know, to really dig in and make those repairs and renovations on a building moving forward? So it's important that you look at both options before you make a decision, and see financially which way is maybe the best way to go.
And then just some takeaways from today, and then we can open it up for some questions. You know, COVID-19 really did force us to change the way we think a little bit in terms of budgets, projects, just our daily operations. I think it's important for us to really take time and think about what those impacts were on our operations, and, you know, how you can sustain, you know, moving forward, and, you know, be ready for things to start going to go back to normal, and how you're going to make that shift. You know, also take time to understand your buildings. This is a perfect time to get to know your buildings a little bit better. Work with your staff to understand different components of your buildings. You know, I know Neil always told his staff, don't rely on others to tell you what's happening, go see it for yourself. If there was a problem in one of our buildings, we'd want to be there to be educated about things that are going on in our buildings, and be involved in those decisions. Also learn about that building and renovation process. You know, some campuses, you might have the opportunity to build new buildings, or you might need to focus more on renovating, you know, current buildings. And I think we've had experience with both of those scenarios, and there's value to both of those. But, you know, the bottom line here is, I think it's, remember that, you know, your buildings really do speak a lot about your operation, your institution. I'm sure it's a showcase on every tour that comes through the institution. So what message are you sending in terms of facilities on your buildings? And I think we should all strive to make sure that we're presenting the best facilities for our students' growth and development. Neil, I don't know if you have anything to close out.
I think you got it.
I mean, if you do have any questions or anything, Neil and I, we can always be reached. There's our email. I know a few of you have put emails in the chat. I have those written down. I can shoot you all of our documents in the presentation just so you have it as well. But if we can help out in any way, we're always available too.
Okay.
And I guess we can open it up if anyone has any questions. Let's see, we have one. Has your campus had to delay projects in order to address infrastructure issues because of COVID? How have you handled that and communicating how you get back to those projects? Neil, do you have any of those?
Yeah, certainly. We have some buildings that were built here at UAH in the 80s, and the building has had a lot of deferred maintenance over the years, and we definitely had to delay that project. That's been sitting there ready to go for a year and a half, and we just couldn't do it. So we're back in the flow now. We're meeting with facilities on a regular basis. We're starting to talk to contractors, assess the building again. Like I said before, things have changed, financially. So if you had bids from contractors, if you had bids to look at renovations of buildings, those have probably changed. I think most things that we're finding as we've gone through looking at moving forward with this building, the prices have gone up. Some due to COVID and some just due to inflation, but they have gone up. So we're having to rework the financial side of that as well. But we are communicating with our facilities department right now to make sure that we can move forward. It probably will not happen this summer because of the uncertainty, but I can guarantee you that next summer we will have a plan in place to move forward.
Yeah, and we had to defer several projects as well and focus on specific areas of campus. And like Neil said, I have all those projects sort of sitting, and I just had one that I just took and said, this is how much inflation, how much the prices have gone up from February last year to February this year. I don't want to see that jump in pricing again if we wait another year. So let's try to do it if we can.
And I think you're also asking, did we make any major HVAC changes? No, there have not been any major HVAC changes. I think, that the cost of that would have been absolutely incredible. I think we were dependent on filters, dedensifying, those type of things, instead of really looking at the infrastructure of the building and changing any HVAC or airflow.
Yeah, and I think what we did too, Neil. I think we enhanced some filters in buildings. We were fortunate that a lot of our buildings were sort of on independent air handlers in apartments and areas. But also, like Neil said, dedensifying and just sort of managing flow in our buildings. We don't have a lot of common areas available for students to congregate in right now. We still have some limits on visitors, so we really are cutting down on the amount of people that are in and out of the buildings as well.
Matt, I think we're out of time, so people can get to the next one.
Doesn't this go till 10 or no?
Dante,
how long does this go? Oh, I should know this, huh?
Yeah, you guys have until 10, so you've got some time. The next session
Okay.
doesn't kick
Okay.
off until 10:15.
Okay.
So yeah, if we got other questions, feel free to continue the conversation and
Okay.
questions.
I have a question.
Sure.
My name is Joe McMillion. I'm from the University of South Alabama. When you're talking about going to your facilities people and getting information, feedback about the buildings, do you also provide them information about projects moving forward? Here at South, we're not always involved facilities. I'm the assistant facilities manager. We're not always involved in the financial end of it. So I'm not sure how we can move forward on some of these things because I don't know where the money's at. And maybe I'm not supposed to know where the money's at. But it's hard to plan projects and do a 5-year plan if I'm not aware of our budgetary concerns, I guess.
Yeah, so what we've done here is we really work closely with our construction administration, facilities, maintenance staff every year to sort of go over those immediate needs. But we also have that 5-year plan of things that we need to be thinking of. And for us, we know we're going to spend between this amount and this amount every year in terms of capital projects. So what we try to do then is prioritize, and it's not just us saying this is what we need, because we are not the experts by any means in some of these mechanical components and things that are going to fail in buildings. We really sit down annually, sometimes every couple months, and talk about projects and say, okay, this is what we need to get done in summer of 2021. This is what needs to be done in summer of 2022, and get those immediate needs. And then we can try to fill in those other holes with some of those wish list items of things that I'd love to get it done this summer, but if it needs to be pushed to the next summer, it can. So right now for this summer, I have some low-level furniture needs. That's a lot of my expenses. But now I also have elevator issues in a few of my buildings that I know need to be addressed this summer. They're on the slate to already be worked on when students move out in May. But those things are brought to us regularly from our facilities and maintenance partners, because I'm not up there checking those elevators at all. But I mean, we rely on them a lot for that. And Neil, I don't know if you want to expand on that.
I think also, I have not found a leadership team yet that if you show that you're really trying to be a good steward of the university's money, that they won't work with you. I think, I've made sure that if I want to move forward with something, I'm getting my AVP involved or my vice president involved to say, hey, this is what we're looking at. We're trying to, be good stewards of the university's money, make sure we're providing the best safe, secure environment for our students. And I honestly haven't found a leadership team yet that has said, well, we're not going to tell you about finances. And I found that they're very open. If you can show that you're really trying to make a difference, most of them will share some of that information with you. They may not just turn over the spreadsheet to you, but I think they will share information based upon the university master plan and debt capacity to help you make some of those decisions.
Thank you.
We had another question, Neil, in here. We had a couple buildings that we had to evacuate students and renovate due to structural issues and such. Do you have any tips or good ideas regaining student trust when reopening those beds?
I don't know if there's good tips or ideas. I think, I think mostly, a lot of us like to even do some work. When Matt and I were working on things in Alabama, we paint during the year. While students were in the building, with low VOC paint, or we do things where they're seeing us actually doing work in the building. And I think most students, if they see that you're doing things that are better for them and their environment, I think that trust kind of comes naturally. Now, obviously, if you leave deferred maintenance alone and you got lights out and you got broken exit signs and you have those type of things, what's that lend to? That lends people to think you don't care. And they'll continue to do other things, vandalism, or the building will tend to go down. But I think if you can just show them that you're doing things to better their living environment, I think that trust really does come pretty easily from the students when it's time to move back in. I've found that over the years, I've been doing this over 20 something years, that students get really upset about things initially, but I think their memories are a little shorter once they see brand new things and feel like that you really care and are giving them something really nice to live in.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that we've struggled with sometimes is we might say we've done, $1 million of work in a building, and the students go in and say, well, I don't see anything. Well, no, they don't see every building component. So if you're putting in new HVAC system, students aren't going to see that. I mean, they might be smelling that because it's fresh air, better air flow, but they don't see it. So like Neil said, yeah, if you can get new paint, new carpet, some of those things that students see too, it takes some of that negative impressions away. And we had a building on campus that we just did a renovation to that had a horrible reputation, and it smelled, and it was old, and it was dark. Well, we put some money into it, new floors, new paint, some airflow help. And now none of those negative impressions are there anymore. So, you know, I think it's a balance between both of those. I think we have a couple more minutes before everyone needs to go to the next session. Neil and I can stick around too if anyone wants to chat afterwards, but really appreciate everyone joining us this morning. And I hope you have a great rest of the SEAHO week. And